Harriet Ann Jacobs was born into slavery on February 11, 1813, and died March 7, 1897. Her first single work, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, was published in 1861 under the name Linda Brent. She became one of the first authors of an autobiographical narrative about the struggle of slavery for women. Jacobs changed the names of her family, friends, and masters to better conceal her and their identity. Harriet was born into slavery to Elijah and Delilah Jacobs in 1813. When Harriet was 6, her mother died and she was sent to live with her mother's owner, Margaret Hornblow. There she learned how to read, write, and sew. She remained there until 1825, when she was then sent to Dr. James Norcom, or how we know him, Dr. Flint. Harriet was ignorant of her life of servitude as a slave for 6 years. At the mere age of 15, she began to fight off sexual harassment from her master, Dr. Flint, and the verbal attacks from her mistress. The constant sexual leads from her master infuriated her mistress, but the doctor never would let anyone punish Harriet, although at the beginning of chapter 6, The Jealous Mistress, Jacob says, "I would rather drudge out my life on a cotton plantation than to live with the unprincipled master and jealous mistress." Just from this excerpt, we can see how miserable Jacobs was in her current state of forelooming sexual abuse. Chapter 5, The Trials of Girlhood, begin by telling us that her first few years with the Flints was kind, but when she entered the age of womanhood, 15, she began to feel the sexual pressure from her master. Jacob was raised by her very strict grandmother and knew that his impulses were immoral and treacherous. Jacobs was constantly being told by her master, Dr. Flint, that she was disobedient, and therefore she must succumb to his will. Jacob fought every day and did not give in to Flint's advances. Although her mistress believed the opposite and sought to make Jacob's life even more miserable than it already was, Jacob's childhood dissolved into a puddle of hatred, temptation, and gloom. Chapter 6, The Jealous Mistress, opens with Jacobs telling her readers that she'd rather live a life of starvation and freedom than be a pampered slave to an unprincipled master. Mrs. Flint's malvoyant nature and unyielding suspicions of Harriet's and her husband's so-called affair led her to demand Harriet to sleep in the room adjoining to hers, where Harriet would wake up in the middle of the night and find Miss Flint bending over her or whispering strange things into her ear. This insanity was of course brought on by Mr. Flint's attempt to have Harriet sleep with him and his daughter as her night nurse. Her mistress's jealousy is felt only by Harriet as pity. The institution of men being ignored by their wives as they had children with slave girls, only to be shipped off to other plantations, is absolutely disgusting and disgraceful. This was felt not only by the plantation wives, but by the slave girls also. Chapter 11, The Loophole of Retreat. In this chapter, we read about Jacob's remarkable and drawn-out escape. Harriet escaped to her grandmother's house, where she hid in a small attic-like enclosure with only a peephole for 7 years. She was frequently submerged in pain, but her grandmother and friends' visits, along with the peephole that allowed her to see her children, lifted her spirits. She wrote later on, "At times I was stupefied and listless. At other times I became very impatient to know when these dark years would end, and I should again be allowed to feel the sunshine and breathe the pure air." After 7 years of pain, yearning for her children, and fear of being caught by Mr. Flint, she was able to make her escape. Chapter 14, Preparations for Escape. Jacobs was visited by her friend Peter, who told her that her day had come. She then resolved to speak to her son after 7 years of silence, where she learned that he had known of her whereabouts and had kept her secret from Mr. Flint all along. She told him of her plan of escape, and that soon they would join her. Jacobs boarded a boat in Edenton Harbor, bound for Philadelphia, and traveled by rail to New York soon after. There she was reunited with her daughter and brother John. 1 year later, her son joined them in Boston. Harriet, in years to come, found her freedom with a woman abolitionist and was joined by her entire family. There she found her life as a writer, a mother, and a free woman.